experiences and share knowledge more effectively. So the goal of today's meeting, which Florencia Zapata will be leading from the Peru team, is to discuss frameworks and methodologies together to start toward an agreement on how we'll all be working. So I think with that, just give a quick introduction of everybody. I think it might be nicest if we go down the list. So I would invite Ali and Kat to introduce themselves. Ali, Kat, are you there?
Mike, Ali here, IUCN based in DC office.
Hello everyone, and this is Catherine Blackwood, also in the IUCN Washington DC office.
Thank you. Florencia.
Hi everybody, Florencia Zapata from the Mountain Institute, right now in Berlin, but moving soon.
Jorge.
Hi everyone, this is Jorge Recharte, the Mountain Institute.
Keshav. Glad you could join us. Keshav, is your microphone on?
You can activate your microphone using the icon in the camera and voice box.
How about Mireya?
Hi everybody, this is Mirela from Peru. I am coordinator of the project in Peru.
Perfect, thank you. And Sophie and James, I'm really glad you guys could join us. Thank you. Is your microphone working? The microphone icon is under the camera and voice box.
It is enabled, but she may be not speaking right now. Oh.
Okay, it sounds like the connection in the plane you've gone to is a bit of a challenge again. I'd suggest that everybody who can use the microphone, use it and type their questions in the chat box so we have that record. I believe, Juan, you're recording, so this will be available for download later, as are all of the presentations and discussions. So hopefully everybody can refer back to that later when the internet connection is better. So I think I would then invite Florencia to begin. I'm going to apologize in advance because I'm going to need to disappear in about 20 minutes, but I encourage you all to continue the conversation. And thank you again for everybody for being here.
Thank you very much, Erin. I hope everybody can hear me well. If you have any problem, we are going to record the meeting. Thank you, Sophie and James, for your introduction. Okay, and as Erin mentioned, the goal of the meeting today is aligning frameworks and methodologies in flagship countries. This is our first meeting for that, and for sure more meetings will come. And I am very happy to to have the opportunity to facilitate this meeting. And what I am going to share with you is a work in process. Some ideas I want to share with you, and I would like to receive your feedback in order to work together on these ideas and expanding these concepts. I am trying to pass the slide, but I cannot. Juan, could you help me, please? Thank you. I think that internet connection is not so good here neither. All countries in our Scaling Up Mountain Ecosystem Adaptation Program need to build consensus on frameworks and key concepts, strategies, best methodologies, criteria, and implementation processes and cycles that we will use consistently in order to gather evidence and share lessons in a consistent manner. Yes, I am using the arrows, Juan, but it is taking time. I don't know why. I would like to...
Or you can, in the bottom of the slide, there is a previous and next button.
Yes, I am doing that, but it is not moving. Could you please?
Oh, sorry. You are not a presenter right now.
Okay, that's the reason. Okay, thank you very much. Okay. Then, as transversal to the whole program, we need to build consensus and agreement on EBA framework and key concepts. For example, what is EBA and EBA quality criteria? This is something that we are already discussing through the first two webinars we had. The first one that I facilitated and the second one that Ali and Kat facilitated. But besides that, we need also to build consensus on our participatory framework. Both TMA and IUCN have local participation as a key central element of our work in the field. Then we need to be sure that we share a common understanding on what participation is for us and how are we going to implement participatory process. What kind of participation typology we are going to use, and what level of participation we expect to reach with our local partners. Also, I think it will be important that we share a common understanding of what participatory research is, perhaps not in detail, not very deep, but at least some key concepts and methods. And besides these frameworks and key concepts, we also need to build consensus on the strategies we are going to use. Some of them are transversal to the whole program. For example, knowledge management strategy and communication strategy. That will be very helpful in order to learn together, record our lessons, and develop a record system for all countries. And also in order to communicate our lessons learned and our progress. How are we going to do it? What tools are we going to use? Some of them are already being developed by Jesse, our communicator specialist, but for sure we could do much more in order to work together. Also, in terms of strategies for output 3 especially, we will need to develop consensus on our advocacy strategy. For sure, both TMI and AUCN have went through advocacy processes before, and IUCN is very well known for that. But are the 3 flagship countries and later the 3 expansion countries going to use the same advocacy strategies, perhaps sharing some part of the strategies? For sure, we need to contextualize the strategy in each country, and conditions are not the same, and opportunities are not the same, but at least to have a common understanding of how are we going to implement the activities, the advocacy activities in output 3. And both for frameworks and key concepts and strategies, these web meetings we had and the meetings we are going to have, and especially the kickoff meeting next year in Peru, will be very important. But for some activities we cannot wait until April or May, but we need to start right now. In fact, in most countries we are already starting with many activities. And now we need also to build consensus on best methodologies and criteria we are going to use, transversal to the whole program. What kind of participatory monitoring and evaluation system we are going to use? What's the methodology we are going to use? In this sense, we are thinking with some and preparing some methods that we already apply in the previous flagship project. For example, the action learning framework for documenting our learning and planning. But for example, in output 1, we need to build consensus on best methodologies and criteria for, in activity 1.1, evaluate all EBA measures for possible continuation. I know that in Peru we are already almost done with this activity, and we have been developing some criteria, but I am wondering if in other countries you are using the same criteria, perhaps other. How are you doing this evaluation of EBA measures in flagship sites for possible continuation? This is something I think it will be very helpful. The 3 countries share. How are we implementing these activities? What's the methodology and criteria we are using? The same for activity 1.2, which is to establish environmental, social, and economic baselines. For example, yesterday, James, you sent your terms of references for this baseline, and Nepal is in the same process, and Peru will start very soon. Then it will be very helpful and very important, in fact, that we share some the same or similar methodologies that will help us to compare our results. And the same for activity 1.4, which is to assess the effectiveness and sustainability of EBA measures. against baseline indicators, building on existing monitoring system, and using a standardized approach. Then we are already analyzing the 3 countries. We are already analyzing our effectiveness, potential effectiveness methodologies, and in fact, by Friday, we have to send Erin our matrix analyzing effectiveness methodologies. And this is an example on how we can work together. And for output 2, we need to evaluate potential sites and select new EBA project sites and stakeholder partners and develop upscaling plans. Then what's the methodology and criteria we are going to use to evaluate these potential sites and select new EBA project sites? This is something we will develop together. And besides strategies and criteria, we also need to build consensus on implementation processes or implementation cycles. For example, in output 1, activity 1.3 is to support continued implementation of selected EBA measures under the principles of adaptive management. And of course, in this case, as each EBA measure has its own particularities, and each community has its own particularities and context, the implementation process will be designed for supporting continuation, will be designed for these particular communities and EBA measures, but we should at least share a common understanding on how are we going to use, and at least to have a process for sharing the progress in each country. How are we doing these activities, and in order to give us feedback and work together. In output 2, we have several implementation processes to conduct. For activity 2.4, which is the training activity, right? Conduct outreach and workshops for local stakeholders and technicians in order to build capacity in many things. EBA planning, decision support, financing, and so on. Then it will be very helpful to have a common training for all countries, at least the basis of the training. For sure, we will need to adapt the training and even translate it in each country and adapt it to the particularities of each reality. But to have common sections and elements for all training processes in all countries will be very important in order to gain consistency as a global program. Also in output 2, activity 2.5 is to implement new mountain EBA measures. How are we going to do this? And we have both TMI and IUCN experiences already on implementing EBA activities, but perhaps we are working with new teams or with new partners and sharing this common understanding of how EBA implementation process is and the steps will be very helpful to all of us. And in this activity, this activity 2.5, when we implement this new EBA measure, we will need to run a new vulnerability assessment. And for example, this is something we have been working closely with the Nepal team in the last weeks, and then to standardize our methodology for a participatory vulnerability assessment, which is something that we could discuss in more detail later. Also, in Activity 2.6, in expansion countries, promote incorporation of mountain EBA into other promising ongoing projects and initiatives. How are we going to do it? Again, for sure, reality in each country is different, opportunities are different, but to have at least a common implementation process in order to be sure that we are not losing some steps or opportunities. And this is just to open the discussion and open the conversation to all of you, that I wanted to share these slides. And I would like to right now ask all of you to make comments or questions and regarding these topics. And later I will ask each country to tell us around these topics your current work and priorities. What are main needs for Nepal, for Uganda, and for Peru? And what do you think that, or how do you think we will work together? And before opening the discussion, Juan, could you please share this Word document? Thank you very much. I'm not sure if you can you read? Because the words are very small. I'm not sure if you can read it. But this is, thank you, Juan. This is a document. It is, I hope you can see it better now. This is a guiding document. It is also a work in progress, but I have been looking for resources and reference documents for each of these elements I already mentioned. For example, for frameworks to inform our work, the EBA framework. We have this FIBA paper, which is in English and in Spanish. And regarding participatory framework, we have also some documents which are both in English and Spanish that could be helpful in order to share a common understanding. Regarding, for example, methodologies to conduct participatory vulnerability assessments, there are several documents we could use as resources. Right now, we are in the processes of selecting the methodology we are going to use. We have, each country has to complete and send Erin by Friday our analysis. But I just wanted to suggest some resources we could use, and also to conduct M&E and to conduct the baseline and to assess EBA effectiveness. And the same for the strategies. For sure, as a program we are going to, or we already have a program strategy for communication, knowledge management, and I'm sure we are going to do it the same for advocacy. And there are some literature reviews on EBA and on vulnerability assessment I have been looking at, and here I have prepared a list of reference documents. This is a document that I would like that we build together and will help us to implement the different activities in our project. And well, now I would like to open the discussion, to have your comments and feedback on what I presented. Perhaps I don't know if we could do it just raising your hands. Juan, perhaps you can explain us how to raise the hands, please.
Okay, can you hear me? I hope so. In the and use in the middle upper left there is an attendee list, and you can in the corner there is a smiley face that you can click and you can raise your hand. Please don't move the chat. Florencia.
Yeah, I was trying just to organize the information as it was before.
Okay.
But better if you do it, Juan. Thank you.
Face to raise your hand, or just activate your microphone. The left side, the camera and voice box, there is a microphone icon. It probably is with a red line crossing if it is not activated, but you can activate it if you click on it. It should glow green when it is activated. Or you can use the chat to communicate.
Yeah, Sophie says in 2.5 on developing new mountain EVA measures may not be applicable in all sites. I think that some of them may not really be new, depending on what is identified and recommended during the vulnerability assessments. This is a question. Well, it depends on how each country is conducting the activity. For example, I'm not sure if all countries are going to conduct a new vulnerability assessment in the areas where you are already working. For example, in Peru, we are going to conduct a new vulnerability assessment in the areas where we are going to implement a new EVA measure, which is activity 2.5. But in the places where we already implemented the measure, what we are going to do is to update the baseline and the vulnerability assessment we already conducted in the past. Then we don't need to conduct a new vulnerability assessment for those EVA measures we are following. But in the case of Uganda and Nepal, I'm not sure how are you working on that regard. I see that Ali and Kat are writing, and Keshav too. Perhaps some of you would like to writing. You are very welcome. Yes.
Okay. Thank you, Florencia. Very useful, presentation and setting the tone. I would suggest just a few things so that we are all on the same page, and that will all it contribute towards having a sort of universal approach. Though not the same approach, but maybe having similar approach for the work we will be doing. First is when we are going for new sites. Is there any uniform site selection criteria? Because we did use it in previous, mountain EBA. So it would be good to have a site selection criteria which will overall depict the reasons why we're doing it and how would we approach, with stakeholders that, so that otherwise there could be a lot of pressure कि why we working in this village and not other village and all that. So we need to have and draw lines somewhere. Second is when we have selected the site, we need to have site info. And if we can have a template, based on all the suggested work which for the baseline Peru would be doing, Uganda is doing. So if we have a broad sort of set of parameters, what we are looking for example, for baseline, are we going into a household survey, maybe 10% of the population of that village, so that we can have some sort of baseline where we can see after our interventions where we are in MNE and achieving all the indicators and promises we have made in the project document. And that info would lead towards, because if we can have a parameters about weather changes and all this in the last 4 or 5 years, because things are changing very fast. So Florencia, my take on that, if we have already done VIA, that was about 5 years ago. Things would have changed now a lot. So we can do a very rapid assessment based on the techniques we have employed in some other countries through other projects. And that methodology is available and we can share with you. But that is important. We should use one methodology and then we can adapt it as per local conditions. And that baseline would help us in rapid assessment in having very sort of with perception studies and all this, and which we have done for VIA, and not going in depth VIA with external services, because most of the time, rather 90% of the cases, those remain in the shelf and we don't use those vulnerability assessment because those are too technical and we have limited resources to invest in that specific site. So vulnerability assessment must be based on available resources and prioritization by local stakeholders and for additionality purposes. So all these we can have sort of some templates, and then depending on local conditions and available information, so gaps can be identified and then each country can take their respective actions. Over.
Thank you so much for your feedback. And yes, that's the idea. Yes, Juan, you would like to say something?
This is Jorge.
Jorge,
I'd like just to add to what Ali said, that I think that we also ask for some sort of a schedule, set of priorities, because it's quite a complex task that we have in front of us. I agree very much with Ali, with what Ali said, in the sense that it would be a universal framework, but there will be, a diversity of different angles and approaches that reflect context and different experiences in each country. But still, it's quite a demanding, long, list of tasks that need to happen. So having like kind of schedule of what should be first, that would be something important to have. And I think that we also need to be super practical with this. And this concept, I agree very much with the idea of having matrices, probably for each one of these consensus building needs that we have, so that we sort of at the very least communicate what we're doing. I don't know how much discussion we really can have. We have 3 or 4 methodologies. They all seem to be very appropriate. The vulnerability one that has been suggested, the TESA. We need to do that exercise of at least giving our opinions and then saying, let's go ahead, and then having some very practical tools in the web, so that we communicate how are we going about implementing the methodologies. Because building consensus is, I think, something that should be done hopefully quickly. Over.
Thank you very much, Jorge, and again, thank you very much, Ali. Perhaps someone else could add an opinion to what Ali and Jorge already said, and about the presentation I made at the beginning, which was only just to open the discussion as it is happening right now. It looks like Keshav is facing problems and not hearing well. And in Uganda, yes, I agree with Ali. And yeah, I absolutely agree with you, Ali, too, and with you, Jorge. And yeah, we have these new sites to implement EBA, but just to add into what you said, Ali, the new site implementation is just one part of the project, but of course it is a very important part, but this is just one part of a project that have as its main goal to upscale EBA. Then what I wanted to do with the presentation was to show that there are several activities with different methodology needs, and that will be helpful to agree, and yeah, to have this, like you mentioned, Ali, this universal framework, although it will be applied in different ways in each country according to the specific context. And yeah, I agree also on what you mentioned about the vulnerability assessment. Of course, what we did 5 years ago, we need to update, but I think that it is different to update a vulnerability assessment that was already done in an area where we have been working for perhaps 3 or 4 years, than building a new vulnerability assessment, perhaps in an area where we don't have information and where we don't know the context. Probably we will need to invest much more time there than for just updating the vulnerability assessment. And in fact, what we are going to do in Peru, as I mentioned at the beginning, is to update both the vulnerability assessment and the baseline that we conducted in the communities where we implemented the EBA measure before. But we need to implement a new EBA measure, and for that we will need a new vulnerability assessment. And this rapid assessment you mentioned, Ali, if you have a document that you could share with us, because you know that in Peru we implement IUCN this participatory rapid assessment in 2 communities, and we have that experience, and we know the methodology we use, but perhaps you have something else you could share.
Thank you. I agree with you and Jorge also that we need to have a matrix with timeline and all this. what I'm trying to point out that we need to do a rapid assessment of vulnerability assessment, not the detailed one we all did in Mountain EBA, because those took huge time and effort and resources, up to 200,000 to 250,000, and it took 2 years. What we did, rapid assessment, IUCN, in all these cases, especially in Nepal and Uganda, we utilized existing information, existing tools, and then we also worked in Southeast Asia and came up with, basic PRA techniques and some methodologies where, project teams, not external person. That would be my suggestion, because when we bring in external, they try to go in all tangent, but project teams, they are very much familiar. What are the project objectives? What are the resources available? And then there is also, that sense we have to do this as per our capacities and all this, and not suggesting those things which could be very state of the art, but would not have any replicability element and other things. So we did that assessment, and it took us 4 to 5 days doing, again, depending on the geographical area we are covering. We also did together with some available students and other, just a survey 10% of the population, so that we can know baseline about livelihoods and other. And then also a perception study, which is the tool is called Create, and we can share with you all. That is about which integrate biodiversity, climate science, and local perception, what changes are coming. Because end of the day, if we have $10,000-$20,000 per village, and we go into those scientific details where they're telling us, oh, this much is problem, or that is the projection for this. No, we need to only look into current livelihoods. If it's agriculture or water resource or whatever, what are the issues there? Because the rest we might not be able to address. Those are beyond. We can do policy advocacy on those issues, but we can, field work will be very much based on the current livelihoods of the people, so that we can either reduce projected risk or enhance their resilience through livelihood and overall human well-being. So we can share with you all these techniques. And but the first thing is we need to come up with the site selection criteria, so that end of the day we don't have orange and apples, and we cannot do, and it will all become like set of countries and not a joint project. That is major concern of BMUB. They say we do global projects, but then those are individual set of activities, and there is no binding thing. So binding is not just a joint report. It also, if we can have a broad parameters, and then again, end of the day, adaptation is locale specific. So we need to do action on ground as per local conditions. But site selection criteria, it for site info, and then VI8 approaches, and then action plan. We should follow a broad set of parameters, and then we will come up with those outputs which can be comparable and will showcase additionality of working together. Thank you. Over.
Thank you very much, Ali, and thank you in advance for sharing this methodology. And yeah, I absolutely agree. When we are talking about this participatory vulnerability assessment, we are not talking about the classic VIA, as we know that in the previous Mountain EBA flagship program took almost 2 years. We are talking about something very quickly, but very efficient. And then thank you very much in advance for sharing this methodology. By the way, IKI has suggested also a methodology, which is the vulnerability source book that all countries are reading right now in order to give feedback to ERIN in order to select the methodology. And it will be very useful to have this other methodology you are mentioning, and besides 1 or 2 more that we are selecting. But and this is very important. And again, also, talking about site selection criteria. This is something that we need to agree. And I am. If you have suggestion on how to start, we had some selecting criteria we used for the previous flagship program. Perhaps we could start sharing that criteria and working together very quickly in a document. If you agree, that could be one agreement of this web meeting. To have this site selection criteria ready in the following weeks. But besides new sites, we have the previous sites where we will continue working, and also we have more activities. And then, although I understand that the to reach consensus of site selection criteria and this vulnerability assessment methodology, I just want to ask everybody to think on other methodologies we need to agree on. For example, some of you are, and I think perhaps even all of us are going to update the baselines, and then we will need to agree on not a specific indicator, but yes, in topics that we need to measure, and those should be also included in the vulnerability assessment, and those are also related with the way we are going to assess EBA effectiveness. Something important is that these methodologies and criteria should be all integrated. I mean, we have an activity which is very important and goes through the end of the project, which is to assess EBA effectiveness. And for that, we are going to use the data coming from old and new sites. And then I think that we also need to work on how are we going to assess effectiveness in order to be sure that we are going to design the vulnerability assessment and the baselines to give us information that will help us to assess EBA effectiveness. I don't know if my point is clear. I just want to stress that besides site selection criteria and vulnerability assessment methodology and the matrix that will come with these 2 points, we need also to look at how are we going to assess EBA effectiveness, and besides that, other frameworks and processes like I presented today. But I don't know if you agree on this, just to move forward, or if you have any comment on that.
This is Erin. I would comment briefly. I'm back because my meeting was moved back, and I'm going to have to just try and disappear again in another moment or so. I'd say it's a very good idea to move forward with site selection. That should be an easy thing to agree upon. Florencia, maybe you can just start a quick document where you explain your site selection measures and then pass that around to this group and people can add their comments or track changes to the document and compare that to what they've been using, and we can meld all of those different ideas into a single way forward for the whole group. I'm hoping my audio is working. I'm not hearing anything at the moment. Can anybody hear me? Yes, okay.
Is there.
Perfect.
Just one point, we already have drafted selection criteria, so maybe we can and used to do the track changes and additions and all that.
Let's do that, and that will be part of the templates that the 4 of us just agreed on and that Colleen is helping make the final changes on. So those are, I'm hoping, will be ready Friday for the whole group to use. So site selection is something I think we can agree on with track changes and such via email in the next week or so. And then I think it'll be very interesting to see what how people have responded to the review of the different documents that were sent out. So again, please try and submit those on Friday. I will try and bring things together, and then we can discuss further how to move forward and bring the different ways things were done during the individual flagship programs into a unified framework and methodology going forward. So Uganda, James and Sophie in particular, I have not heard much yet about how things were done in Uganda, so I'd be very curious, especially when these documents start going around and we're comparing them, what you guys were working on. So please do share and give your feedback.
Thank you so much, Erin. Yes, perfect. Then starting. There is some echo. I'm hearing my own voice. Perhaps you can turn off the audio while you are not speaking.
Sophie is trying to talk, I think.
Or Sophie, will you like to say something? Please, go ahead.
Sophie, can you?
Are you getting us here?
Yeah, we hear you now.
You hear us now?
If you can speak a little louder or near the microphone, please.
So am I being clear? Are you getting us? Okay. This is James. Sophie has gone for another Skype meeting. But basically, just a few comments. First of all, overall, this is great. As in Uganda, with all the discussion which has been going on, and the document is quite clear to us, the kind of trajectory which needs to be followed. I think basically what needs to be agreed is on the details, how to go along that trajectory. And that's
please, James.
Yes.
The volume we hear is too soft. We cannot hear you well. Can you speak a little louder or closer to your microphone?
Okay.
A little
louder now.
More, if you can.
Louder now. Okay. Are you getting? Is it much better now? Okay. Thanks. So what I was saying, overall, in Uganda, we agree exactly with what all is being said. because the document is quite clear and is reflected in the discussion we've already gone through. So basically what remains to be done is to agreeing on a trajectory how to go in there. Now, on just quick comments, one is on the criteria. I'm not quite sure whether we shall have a very uniform criteria for the selection of the sites. I would like just to share with you the kind of thinking which we're using in Uganda. One is the previous work. Because in Mount Elgon, we've had a lot of work in Mount Elgon. IUCN has a lot of work in Mount Elgon for probably the last 20 years. But particularly over the last 5 years, we've had a lot of environmental assessments under the Resilience Framework Project, which was a 3-year project. And then there was also a environmental assessment from the last EBA project and other projects. So we kind of have an idea where the real critical issues are. And two, we're looking at, so that would be one of the guiding criteria. The other one is actually on government priorities. As you might have seen from the terms of reference I sent out yesterday, the Ministry of Water and Environment has a very elaborate framework for integrated water resources management around the country. And Mount Elgon is one of the priority areas they are going to be working in. And they have expressed a desire actually to work with us. And they already have a kind of funding to support that process, particularly the CP catchment, where we had the oil work. So that basically falls in line with what we're doing. So what we could be looking at is working in where we're building on all the EBA sites, first of all. Two, we are leveraging government efforts because the Ministry of Water and Environment actually is a member of IUCN. And then that also creates a lot of opportunities for a bigger programming for the Mount Elgon area. And then the other one also, of course, is overall government strategies and policies which are under play. For example, the government of Uganda right now is preparing its climate change bill. So the initiatives, and Mount Elgon is one area which is badly hit with landslides and that kind of thing, climate change impacts. And so the sites where we are working in is one of the sites which are badly hit when it comes to climate change impacts. So doing activities in those sites kind of helps us to pick evidence of things to influence the policy directives at national level. So those are the kind of criteria that we're looking at. And of course, also now, as I already mentioned, having the Ministry of Environment coming to support us in even going beyond the sites we originally thought we could do, spreading it both upstream and lower stream, then that even make it more critical that we need to have a more holistic approach to get all this together as a team with the ministry. Hello.
Thank you, James.
Yeah. I don't know if you're still with me.
Yes, all of us.
Good.
Yes, thank you very much.
Well,
And could you please turn off the audio? Thank you. Then we don't have echo. Yeah, that's. Yeah, I think we all agree that we are going to have like some site selection criteria, and perhaps in each country we will need to add or adapt some of those criteria in order to to follow or yeah, to contextualize it. But for example, yeah, taking into account governmental priorities will be a criteria. Perhaps in each country, governmental priorities will be different, but in all cases, we need to take them into account. In that sense, we need some common criteria, and perhaps we will need to add or adapt the specific criteria according to the specificities or the context of each country. But thank you very much for giving us your example. And yeah, I agree with you, Erin, that starting with the site selection criteria could be very useful. And thank you, Ali, for sharing the document in advance. And as Erin mentioned, we could work together on the document. But besides site selection, right now both Uganda and Nepal are already starting the vulnerability assessment, and in the case of Uganda, in January, the baseline process, as well as in Peru. Then I will say that besides working on site selection criteria, we will need to discuss the vulnerability assessment. And it is great to know that besides those documents that Erin sent to us for review, we will have also this other methodology that you, Ali, are going to share with all of us, this CREATE. Perhaps we could add that to the table, Erin, if you are still with us. I think that perhaps starting with those 2 points will be enough. And if you agree, starting with site selection criteria and the vulnerability assessment process. And the vulnerability assessment process is already ongoing. And perhaps we could add this other methodology. Do you think that would be the step we should implement? Erin?
I think that's a good way forward. Thank you, Florencia. Again, I think, and maybe Ali and Kat can add their 2 cents on here, but I think moving ahead together with site selection, I'm concerned just try and get that done perhaps even next week. I think that's going to be a matter of comparing how we've already done this and then coming to a consensus. So it's really just fine-tuning what we've all done in the individual countries before. And Ali, I think you mentioned that you already have a vulnerability assessment method that you can share with us. And again, comparing that to what was done in Peru, what was done in Uganda and Nepal, and I think there's some very direct connections there, and fine-tuning that process. I also think Nepal, Uganda, and Peru, it would be great if Florencia, Anu, Keshav, and James all, at least via email, discuss the terms of reference as a group, myself and Ali and Kat included. You guys are the best source of information for each other. I mean, you are the ones actively doing this and can provide the best feedback. We can help guide that and add our additional comments as the global team. But I'd really, really encourage these 3 countries to work very closely together, because at the end of the day, you are the experts on the ground. So please don't hesitate to really reach out to each other for feedback.
Well said, and this is what we would also encourage all our colleagues at IUCN, at TMI, again reiterating that it's not set of individual activities. This is a global initiative and we all need to work together. And it's not that one is better than the other, but collectively, as they say, a whole is greater than the sum of its parts. We need to show additionality, why we working in these 3 and 6 countries, which will add value, not to go for just one country approach. Another thing that needs to be showcased and the process needs to be documented so that we have evidence not just in our head but also on paper. And again, this selection criteria or other methodologies, it's not to replace any existing work. It is just to strengthen the work and capture the knowledge and experiences which we have in Uganda, Nepal, and Peru, and put them on a piece of paper which can then inform the work which we will be starting in Colombia, Bhutan, and Kenya. So in that way, these things are important because in the flagship countries, and learned a lot through our mistakes. Let's try to avoid those mistakes in new countries and new sites when we're selecting new sites. So that's why it's important to have something on piece of paper, not just on individual basis. And then VIA, another, again to reiterate, we, depending on local conditions, we can follow different methodologies, but again, there should be some connections. And we need to do rapid assessment, not in depth, which can always remain as a scientific and good technical study, never to be implemented, or only 10% gets implemented, as was the case in 80 other projects which we evaluated through UNFCCC. That most of the time VIA studies, they remain as a standalone document, and then village level we do only little bit of work. So why to maybe generate very maybe valuable information, but which has a shelf life of few weeks. So it's critical that our team should be talking to each other, sharing information, giving time. Maybe it may appear we are only responsible for one respective country or site, but that will mean that we are not building upon each other's strengths, and that surely will contribute not going beyond this project. This project is a stepping stone towards developing a bigger mountain initiative where we are trying to sell it to different donors and other. So if we will keep doing individual work, surely, trust me on it, because that's what feedback we got through first phase of Mountain EBA. We not need to go beyond it. And then for future, we need to see the bigger picture, which will only be possible if we work together. Thank you.
Yes, thank you for making all that wheel. I think what we have here is maybe a case of oranges at different states of ripeness. And it's really a matter of drawing on the experiences that the flagship countries already have, really making sure for the next part of this project, we're really all working together in the same stage of ripeness, if I can continue with my bad metaphor. So you are all equally experienced with ecosystem-based adaptation as flagship countries, and now it's time to compare notes and then take steps forward together. So I don't consider this a huge amount of brand new work. It's really not. It's really bringing the different threads from the flagship experience together and then being able to hand that to our expansion countries so that they're also moving forward with us.
Thank you, Erin. Thank you, Ali. Yes, exactly. This is, well, I think that this is the spirit of this meeting, just to be sure that we are developing a sharing process and working together. We don't want to work as in silos, each country doing its own activities and things without interchanging information and lessons with the other countries. or teams, because, for example, in the case of Nepal, we have 2 teams working in the same country, and the idea is to work all together. And as I said at the very beginning, my presentation was just as a way to open the discussion, and just to note that along the project we have many activities that will give us the opportunity for sharing and for thinking together. And although we don't have to implement activities in the strictly same way, yes, having this universal framework will be very important for binding all countries and for creating this global project. Yeah, and then thank you very much, and I look forward to continue working on the site selection and the vulnerability assessment issues. Just please note I will be on vacations, as Erin and my Peru colleagues know, from December 15 to January 15. But I will coordinate with Erin and my Peruvian colleagues how to cooperate with this process. Thank you very much. I don't know, Erin, if you want to mention something very regarding the following steps, or someone else would like to add something.
Does anybody have anything else to add before I just quickly sum up? And then I'd like to ask the Nepal and Uganda teams, what's a better way to communicate? I think the next steps we're going to do mostly through email, through documents, track changes. But I kind of feel that we're not able to involve you well enough because of the internet connection. So I'm wondering if you can recommend a better solution so that we can have these discussions in person. But please, if anybody has any additional comments about this discussion today. Okay, if not, I'm hoping Keshav, Sophie, and James can hear me. Again, I would really like to find a place, a way that we can all communicate, and that seems to be a bit of a problem with internet connections. So I'm wondering if you've had better experiences with Skype. And again, the next steps, let's really focus on responding quickly and as much as a conversational form as possible through email and through using comments and track changes so that we can keep this discussion going on a more equal basis. Sophie, I saw you clicked on the microphone if you had something to add. Oh, I see you.
No, nothing to add. Yeah, at this point.
Does Skype work better for you, or is Wi-Fi always a problem? Internet connection.
Skype is better for us.
Yeah, for example, in the last weeks, I was working with Keshav and the Nepal team in Skype, discussing the vulnerability assessment process they are going to implement very soon. And it worked very well, I think. Right, Keshav?
Okay, we might want to move forward. We're a pretty large team as we are at the moment for Skype, but maybe our next conversation, let's try and hold that with large meetings. We want to continue with this platform because there's more capabilities. But let's move ahead step by step on that. We'll try Skype next time, and hopefully everybody can join the conversation. Okay. Good. Well, thank you guys. I know it's been a challenge to participate, but I'm really glad everybody was here. It's very exciting to have all the flagship countries working together, and I think it sounds like we've got a big task ahead of us, but I think as we start diving into it and breaking it down, as I said before, you guys are the experts. You all have experience on this. It's more a matter of just breaking things down and moving step by step. So I think the next step will be the site selection criteria, which Kat and Ali will send around. And everybody, let's comment on the document, send it so that the next team can comment, and we'll just try and do it as people respond so that we're all working on one document and don't have to merge a million different track changes later. Sorry, I've got a bit of a cold still myself. Ali, if you would also send around the vulnerability assessment procedure that you recommended. I think Florencia has shared many documents in that regard, but maybe we can start working on comparing what has already been done in the different countries with that procedure and trying to merge methods. And we'll go from there. So 2 main tasks. Please don't forget again to fill out that table and send it in. It's not a homework assignment so much as it is a way to make sure that everybody's looking at the same documents and comparing them to their context. So it's just a way to bring information together so that these conversations can move forward with more information behind them. So that's due this Friday. Let's continue the site selection criteria over email. I know we're getting into the holidays, but again, I think that will be a fairly fast conversation, and we'll work on vulnerability assessments and make sure that's done hopefully early to mid-January. Anybody has any other comments?
Thank you very much, Erin. And I think that we have some following steps, and that is great. Thank you, everybody, for your feedback and comments. And I think that we have enough to work with these 2 tasks. Although, and besides that, I am concerned about we are focusing on selecting sites and the vulnerability assessment, which are important issues, but I hope we will have the opportunity to look at the whole program and be sure that, for example, on assessing the previous flagship activities, which is activity 1.1, and I'm not sure if all countries are working on the same page regarding that activity, for example, and which is key for selecting sites, for example, not the new one, but those where we are going to update our baselines. Are any of you working or already finished with that activity, with the 1.1 activity?
Just to interject quickly there, Florencia, these oft-promised templates that are still coming, I think will be very helpful in that regard. So please expect those, I'm hoping, by Friday. And I think that will help show where we're all at and help streamline that process.
Perfect.
So I apologize again for the delay. There's just many things going on, as you're all very familiar with. Okay, I think we could end there. Thank you again, everybody, for coming. Really appreciate it. Please, any questions, concerns, ideas, do share over email. We are a team, and email is the fastest way to get your thoughts out there. So thank you for coming, and we look forward to continuing the conversation probably in early January.